Who doesn't love a good romance? Star-crossed lover, a tragic end, a sweeping epic about impossible odds, doomed desires, and forbidden passion? We think we know Cleopatra, the seductress, the lover of Caesar and Mark Antony. But what if her true legacy is far more powerful and far less romantic? Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out how this queen outsmarted Rome. 1. When we hear the name Cleopatra, most of us instantly picture the legendary lovers and betrayers and tragic ends. Though young Cleopatra was intelligent, having studied diligently all her life, learning many languages including Egyptian. Upon assuming the throne with her younger brother and Curregent, Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra realized that despite her lineage, she was viewed with skepticism by the Egyptian people. At its peak, Egypt was the largest exporter of grain in the Mediterranean, supplying wheat to the Roman Empire and to Greece. She offered asylum to Pompey, but once he refused to pay the price, she betrayed him, handing him over to Caesar, who executed him. With this move, Cleopatra secured her independence and expanded her influence in the region. Now, you may think that she was just a simple seductress who charmed Caesar into helping her secure her throne, but that is too simplistic. Sure, she was a smart seductress, but she was also a brilliant businesswoman. She used her relationship with Caesar to obtain military support and favorable trade deals, ensuring the prosperity of Egypt. She wanted to be a powerful force in the politics of the Mediterranean, so she set her sights on Rome. At the time, Rome was in chaos, as rival factions fought for control. And Cleopatra saw an opportunity to advance her interests. Unlike her predecessors, Cleopatra embraced Egyptian traditions and customs, which helped her to gain the loyalty of the Egyptian people. You see, when her mother was alive, the royal court was heavily influenced by Greek culture. They lost the Battle of Actium to Octavian, and this defeat led to the decline of Egypt's power and influence. Though her story ended tragically, her legacy lives on, reminding us of the power and resilience of the human spirit. So what other powerful women in history have been reduced to myths, and what truths still wait to be uncovered? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Despite their defeat, Cleopatra's legacy lived on. Roman propaganda often depicted her as a femme fatale, a symbol of feminine wiles used to manipulate men. This portrayal of her as a dangerous seductress has contributed to the enduring myth of Cleopatra that has persisted throughout history. However, this image of Cleopatra is only one facet of her complex character. In reality, Cleopatra was a brilliant strategist, a skilled diplomat, and a powerful ruler who defied the expectations of her time. However, after her mother's death, Cleopatra shifted to embrace Egyptian culture. She also rebuilt the temple of the goddess Isis in the city of Phyle, which was a major pilgrimage site for Egyptians. Additionally, she issued coins with images of the Egyptian gods and goddesses on them, which symbolized her commitment to Egyptian culture. Furthermore, Cleopatra was a patron of the arts and sciences and hosted cultural events that celebrated Egyptian culture. For instance, she organized literary contests and sponsored the construction of public buildings and monuments. In addition, she commissioned the creation of a museum that housed ancient Egyptian artifacts and texts. And finally, Cleopatra used her knowledge of Egyptian religion to legitimize her rule. She portrayed herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, the most important deity in the Egyptian pantheon. This divine legitimacy gave her rule a sense of sacredness that was difficult to challenge. She formed an alliance with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most powerful allies, who was fighting against Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. Cleopatra and Antony's relationship quickly became both political and romantic, and they had 3 children together. Cleopatra played a clever game here. She chose not to ally with Octavian, who would become the first emperor of Rome, because she knew he would be a threat to her power. Instead, she sided with Antony, who was her equal in power and prestige. This alliance gave her access to vast military and economic resources, and she used them to expand her influence in the eastern Mediterranean. However, as Octavian gained more power, he saw Cleopatra as a threat to his own ambitions. He started a war against her and Antony. Eventually, they were defeated at the Battle of Actium. In 32 BC, Cleopatra and Antony fled to Egypt, but Octavian pursued them. In 30 BC, Octavian's forces arrived in Alexandria, and Cleopatra and Antony prepared to defend the city. However, Antony believed that Cleopatra had betrayed him and fled. When Octavian's forces entered the city, Cleopatra's forces were unable to resist them. Cleopatra was forced to surrender, and she and Antony faced trial in Rome. Antony was found guilty of treason and executed. Cleopatra was taken back to Rome as a prisoner. However, Cleopatra was never taken to Rome. On the night before she was supposed to depart for Rome, she took her own life by allowing an asp, a type of venomous snake, to bite her. She died at the age of 39, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate us today. Under Cleopatra, Egypt became the biggest trading partner of Africa and the East, and the capital of Alexandria was one of the largest cities in the Mediterranean, home to scholars and merchants from all around the world. To keep her position secure, Cleopatra strengthened her navy, building over 200 ships, including warships and merchant vessels. With this formidable fleet, Cleopatra dominated trade routes in the Mediterranean, securing Egypt's prosperity and independence. He was visiting the eastern Mediterranean at the time and made a stop in Alexandria, where Cleopatra lived. According to Plutarch, she arrived at Caesar's ship in the form of a goddess. Obviously, that story is an historical fact, but it does symbolize Cleopatra's goal in meeting with Caesar. She wanted to make an impression, and she succeeded. But this meeting was more than just a romance. It was a strategic alliance. Cleopatra needed Caesar's help to secure her claim to the throne, although Caesar initially supported her brother Ptolemy XIII against Cleopatra. He changed his mind and allied with Cleopatra. Together, they defeated Ptolemy's faction. Confirming Cleopatra's position as sole ruler of Egypt, soon they were lovers too, and Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, Cleopatra was pregnant with his child, and her future was uncertain. Despite her grief over Caesar's death, Cleopatra knew she had to act quickly to secure her own power. With the help of her allies, she took control of Alexandria and defended it against the assassins of Caesar, consolidating her position as the ruler of Egypt. Moreover, she positioned her navy strategically, forming alliances with important cities like Tyre. This naval presence helped protect trade routes and maintain peaceful relations with neighboring kingdoms. Of course, Cleopatra didn't achieve this alone. It was the hard work of her ancestors that built up this empire. Nevertheless, she worked hard to preserve it. For example, Cleopatra was able to manage Egypt's resources to feed the hungry during times of famine and navigate the challenges of wars and conflicts. While neighboring countries suffered from droughts and famines, Cleopatra's Egypt thrived. Part of this was thanks to the Aswan Dam, which had been constructed sometime between 280 and 240 BC by harnessing the power of the river Nile. The dam provided irrigation to the surrounding area and enabled Egypt to produce surplus food crops. This abundance allowed them to ship grains across the Mediterranean. In fact, there are historical accounts suggesting that Egypt exported nearly 4 million bushels of grain annually, feeding much of the Roman Empire. After all, the previous king had alienated many subjects with his heavy-handed tax policies. So Cleopatra began her rule by enacting some progressive policies, including lowering taxes and improving public works. These policies proved popular with the populace and helped to legitimize her rule. However, they did not sit well with her brother, who saw these actions as usurpation. He soon banished Cleopatra from Alexandria and took the title of pharaoh for himself. However, Cleopatra was not done fighting for her birthright. She wasted no time in assembling an army and marched on Alexandria. When her forces met her brothers in battle, they were easily defeated. Cleopatra then reclaimed her throne and restored order to Egypt. And so that is how she got the throne. And maybe that is enough reason why she deserves your respect. But that cinematic version of the Queen of the Nile is only one small part of her story. The Ptolemies were a Greek dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the country's conquest by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, following his death. His generals fought over their share of his newly conquered lands, and Ptolemy I won Egypt, so now the entire country is being ruled by a Greek dynasty. The point is, when Cleopatra was born in 69 BC, her family had been ruling Egypt for over 3 centuries. She was the daughter of King Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra v. Tryphena. And she was named Cleopatra because her family really liked Greek names. Cleopatra was also not the first female pharaoh. There were several strong female rulers before her, including her mother, Cleopatra V. In reality, her life reads like a legend already. From her mysterious origins to her affair with Caesar and Antony, to her spectacular death by poisonous snakebite. But even though she's captivated our imaginations for centuries, we don't actually know that much about her real story. Historical records are sparse and biased, which has given way to generations of romanticized fiction about this iconic figure. The truth of Cleopatra's story will probably never be known, but digging through ancient texts and archaeological evidence can offer glimpses into the real story of one of history's most fascinating women. After all, Cleopatra wasn't born into the royal line of Egypt. She was born into the royal line of Greece. Cleopatra began her reign at age 14 after the death of her father, Egypt Ptolemy XII. According to Plutarch, the Egyptian kingdom was rich, happy, and prosperous. During the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, Cleopatra took advantage of the conflict to build up Egypt's wealth. Egypt was a maritime powerhouse with the largest navy in the eastern Mediterranean, which gave them control over international trade in the region. You see, Cleopatra's first love was Caesar, the Roman general and dictator. But she was not satisfied with just being a queen. Now, remember, although Cleopatra was Greek, she was born and raised in Egypt, and she was very aware of the differences between the two cultures. As we discussed earlier, Antony and Cleopatra's alliance was a powerful force in the Mediterranean, but it was ultimately short-lived. In conclusion, Cleopatra wasn't just a lover, she was a ruler who almost outmaneuvered Rome itself.